What happens when two dudes, one a retired Navy SEAL commander in Colorado Springs, and the other a hippie meditation teacher in New York City, get together to discuss living mindfully? That's a great question, because we don't know what will happen either. Raw, uncut, and unapologetic. Welcome to Men Talking Mindfulness with co-hosts John McCaskill and Will Schneider. Each week, we take an authentic dive into how mindfulness continually impacts our lives, deepens our relationships, and allows us to be emotionally alive. Now, on to the show.
Hello, more Men Talking Mindfulness coming at you. We have a new series that we finally come up with a name for, Masculinity 2.0. It's going to be kind of a sub-series that we're going to continually plug in a couple times a month or once a month to really talk about specific aspects of masculinity and what's it like also to be a masculine man. We're joined by our friend of the show. He's been on our... He did the episode with Religion and Mindfulness, Dr. Clark Chilson from the University of Pittsburgh, who's going to help kind of move the show along. He's going to be interviewing John and I and helping to, put his own input as well. And we're going to talk today about dealing with being offended as men. So thanks for everyone for being here, John, Clark, everyone that's listening out there. And let's just dive right in. We don't have a lot of time today, so let's begin.
All right. Well, thanks, Will, for that introduction. Mm-hmm. And I thought what I'd do is I just ask you guys some questions, get your feedback on what you do to deal with being offended. And how that relates to mindfulness and being a better man. I to give you a moment to think, I'll tell you a time that I was offended. Mm-hmm. And I didn't react, but in retrospect, I think, wow, that was stupid. So I was in the car with my children, who were at the time 8 and 13, and I'm at a stoplight, and there's a car in front of me at the stoplight, right? And it's a short light, and I'm in a hurry, and the light turns green, and the car doesn't move. So I'm assuming that the guy or the person is just on their cell phone. They just haven't paid attention. So I start beeping my horn. So they start moving through this green light. What I did not know is that a guy was crossing the road and the person in front of me wanted to turn right. And so they were waiting for this pedestrian to cross. And the guy, once he came into my view, he looks at me and starts insulting me with can I swear on this show?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So he looks at me and he says, "Asshole." And he just starts screaming at me, "Asshole." And my kids are in the car. I'm like, I don't speak like that in front of my kids. You shouldn't be using that language in front of my children. and I almost turned the car around, despite the fact that I was in a hurry, to confront the guy. And then I thought 3 minutes later, I'm thinking, why? The guy had a point, I might not have been aware that he was crossing, but from his perspective, I was being a jerk. I was telling this car to basically do something.
Run him over.
That would put him in danger.
Yeah.
And why? So here was the question that I think relates to being, a man and being mindful, which is, why did it bother me so much for a stranger to call me a name? Why did that bother me? And the most logical conclusion that I came up with is because I'm self-centered. I'm self-centered, and if I would have taken luckily I didn't react, but just a couple of minutes away from the heat of that situation. And it's no longer a big deal. And now I can see the situation totally different. So just being able to produce that little bit of time between the inciting offense and the response can make a huge difference. And it has made a huge difference when I look back at my own life, and I've been able to do that. So
yeah, one of the things that Will and I, we both teach for an organization, My Steady Mind, and within the My Steady Mind curriculum, we talk about the STEA process, STEA. So the stimulus drives a thought, the thought drives an emotion, emotion drives an action. And what mindfulness allows us to do is basically inject a pause in between the stimulus and the thought. And if you had taken a second to just pause and maybe take a breath, you would have realized the stimulus was someone insulting you, or maybe even threatening your ego, threatening your manhood, quote unquote. And that, because you didn't pause, drove a thought, which drove an emotion of anger, frustration, maybe even embarrassment, which then drove that action, or potentially drove that action. But then you did eventually inject that pause, and you're like, oh, you know what? I was being a jerk, and it kind of changed, reframed the scenario in your head, and reframed your response, turned it into a response rather than a reaction. I think a lot of the time we as men do take offense because we feel another emotion that turns into offense, which turns into anger. I think that first emotion is embarrassment, or maybe fear or shame, and that makes us feel less than. And the anger is our way of proving that we are not less than. It's a defense mechanism. But when we do in fact get angry, we're actually hurting ourselves more than we realize. And we're really doing ourselves and those around us, like your children in that situation, they see you getting upset. They see that as the example of what a man should do when he gets offended. We're doing ourselves a disservice. We're doing those around us a disservice, and we're doing the potential receiver of our anger a disservice.
I'll say, I think, well, that STEA process that you just mentioned, John, and the selfishness that you're talking about, Dr. Clark, it's as men growing up in this country, I know this is the way I was raised, and I see this happening, with the next generation in my family the same way. Is we have this programming of don't let anybody fuck with you, or don't let anybody. I think and that programming of that hypermasculinity of being continually rewarded for our anger, for dominance, for our aggression, for for no compromise, and just kind of really pushing your ego's will forward to just kind of continually put your mark on the world, like that kind of roaring masculinity, if you will, on the inside. What's nice about mindfulness is it helps us to become aware of that for sure. And instead of being reactive, we can respond like you were kind of talking about. But I feel like it just comes back, we're very sensitive as men when we do get offended, because from my sports days, I playing basketball, if I wasn't playing well, I got very sensitive to everything around me. Even if I was playing well and I was trying to like really crush even further my competition, that's when I would, kind of shit talk people and offending them, and bring out the worst in them because I knew I was taking them out of their game, and there's a lot of this programming in the background that comes from our first maybe 15 or 18 years of our development. I mean, I was grown up as an athlete, so that was like a big part of my programming, is just kind of crush the competition and be competitive and win. And I think I have the ability at that time, before mindfulness, is to get very easily triggered, and part of that was being very very easily offended when someone was trying to compete with me. If I'm in a group, and there's like kind of a pecking order that happens often with men, and if I'm not at the top of the heap or near the top of that heap, then I feel less than. So then I need to either disparage other men around me, in order to kind of get to the higher part, higher in the pecking order. So I know I'm touching on a lot of different things here, but that programming is, I think, one of the reasons that I've taken to meditation and to mindfulness practices, because as Dr. Seth says, is like being unfuckwithable is really what I'm trying to get to, right? Is really to be like, you can honk your horn at me all you want, Clark, but, and I might be thinking in my head, what an asshole, you know what I mean? Like, this guy has no idea what I'm doing. Or maybe I would throw a tantrum and be like, asshole, what are you doing? What are you doing? But I try not to let it wreck my day. And I definitely have, even still after practicing mindfulness for almost 20 years, or over 20 years at this point, I still feel that impulse to get really angry and really aggressive when I'm offended.
I do think
sure.
I do think it's a natural reaction. I think it's a natural wiring to get angry, but when we're offended, or in a recent news situation, there was someone who offended someone else who they loved, and they took offense to that and then took violence into their own hands. I think there is a natural reaction there, but we have to short circuit that reaction, right? We have to say, you know what, that's not appropriate. And I mean, in this day and age, the violent response, the angry response is not going to work out in society. You can't do that. And we had John Abate on a couple weeks ago. I mean, this will be aired next week, so it will be a couple weeks ago, and he talked about being hit in a hit and run accident. He was run over on his bicycle, and when he came out of his trauma or coma, he forgave the offender. And I think that's a big piece in this, is we have to take a step back, take that pause, and forgive the offender. And I will say most of the time. I'm not condoning violence by saying that, but there's times when maybe forgiveness may not work right away. And taking a pause and taking some other action that's more appropriate in this day and age is what we've got to learn to do, and mindfulness helps us to do that.
So, I mean, anger is glorified in America today. It's glorified in the sense that it's seen as powerful. Someone who's angry responds powerfully, and then they win. Like you see in movies, like someone becomes angry and they win the race or they win the competition.
Right.
Anger, like get angry. But when I was 19 years old, I boxed for about a year. I was a boxer for about a year. And one of the first things I was taught for boxing is don't get angry. If you get angry, your opponent will take advantage of it and you will lose.
Right.
It is very important in a boxing situation. And that's counterintuitive to the way many people think about what goes on in, physical competition, that anger will somehow help you. But, that was the first thing you had to learn how to do, is don't get angry when you're in a fight, in a boxing match, I should say, because if you do, you're going to put yourself in a weaker position. And it's, as Will said, it's part of the strategy. Your opponent wants to make you angry.
Right.
Right. It could be one strategy, and it works.
It works.
I mean,
so my first point is this: anger can make you weaker, not stronger. That's counterintuitive to many of the messages we hear, but it's the truth in many situations. Anger feels powerful, but it actually makes you weaker in many situations. That's point number one. Yeah.
And it makes you dumber.
It's the easy button. It's the easy button. Like if you are offended and you immediately go to anger, that's easy. Doing something harder, maybe not getting angry, or understanding why you're angry, processing it, sitting with it, and then coming through in a different way with a different emotion. That's hard. That takes a lot of effort and discipline and strength and courage.
Yeah.
So I think that's what we need to start celebrating, is seeing when someone could get angry and they don't, and we celebrate that as the response. I mean, I remember, Clark, as you're talking about, when I was young, I moved to the States from South Africa, so I had this very strong South African accent, and I was plugged directly into school here in the States, and I was mocked for having an accent. What did I do? I beat the crap out of other kids that offended me, and I became known as a good fighter, and it built up my ego. But that was the easy button, right? I mean, granted, I was young and my emotional intelligence was next to zero, but that was the easy button. If I had sat with it and processed it, that would have been way more difficult and taken way more effort and discipline to have done.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is with discipline, it requires practice. Our capacity not to get angry is not something we can just decide to do. If our natural habitual response is to hit the anger button. And so this is where mindfulness comes in. This is where cultivating the mind comes in. In Buddhism, anger is a poison. The idea of righteous anger is just not there. Anger is a poison, and it's a poison because it fosters delusion.
Yeah.
So not to react in anger means that for many of us, that means we have to practice doing something that when a situation that would have gotten us angry in the past will not get us angry today or in the future. And this is where the discipline of mindfulness comes in. Mindfulness is not just an idea that's nice. Mindfulness is a practice and a discipline. And by practicing the discipline of mindfulness, that will allow you to respond to a situation more effectively. And that's a key word, effectively. Because when we respond in anger, we often respond in a way that feels good at the moment, but is ineffective in the long run because it just doesn't jive with what we want to achieve.
Right. And I think when you typically, and what I teach as well, it's like when you respond emotionally, whatever that is, typically you're going to regret the actions or the words that you said, or both. That's been my experience. And mindfulness helps. I mean, one thing I've been exercising for years now is if I am really emotional in a situation, and it could be like an email that's kind of firing me up for some reason, or a text that comes through. And I think we should talk about like online offensive-ness as well. And and that we're kind of talking about now is I don't respond right away until I can get to a neutral emotional place. Then I'll respond, and it could be a couple days, or maybe I won't even respond at all if it's not even worth a response. I mean, that's another thing to think about. It's like, when typically in those situations, man to man, anybody, but man to man in this case, like one man's come another man, and they're kind of handing you in a situation, if they're trying to offend you or trying to work you up, it's because they're not dealing with something on their own, right? And then they're taking that emotion and trying to bring it to you and hand you like their big bag of bullshit, and it's up to you, me in this case, if someone's coming at me in that way, whether I want to take that on or not, or kind of buy their big bag of bullshit, right? And then all of a sudden, then we get into conflict, or just kind of leaving it, be like, look, I'm not interested in picking up what you're putting down. Like that's just not. I don't want to be involved in that, and that's where a lot of the practices have continually, and it's continually a work in progress too, help me to rise into more of that emotional intelligence and get into that space. I always love making this distinction. Reacting is acting without thinking, versus responding is taking a pause, and they're therefore being responsible with what happens next, because you've taken time to think about it. And it might not have to be again in that moment. It could be, hours later, days later, or until you respond non-emotionally.
I want to talk about, the fact that we're talking about anger, and our audience, I'm sure everyone has experienced anger. I want to also just touch on the fact that we experience anger. That doesn't make us a bad person. Experiencing the anger doesn't make us a bad person. Because what I don't want to have happen is somebody experiences anger and then they get angry with themselves about experiencing anger and kind of goes into this downward spiral. Being aware that you're angry is the key. You're aware of it, you sit with it, you process it, and then you come back to that emotionally neutral spot that you talked about, Will. Mm-hmm. For our audience, I don't want them to think, hey, it's not a natural feeling or emotion. Anger is a natural feeling and emotion. And I think at times, maybe you're not taking offense to something, but you see something on the news, or you're angry at a situation in life. Maybe a friend or family member is very sick and maybe terminal, and you can getting angry about that is natural. But then coming off of that and realizing, okay, that's an emotion that doesn't make me an angry person. I'm angry in this instance, and I can come back and be that emotionally neutral person, and then process things from that emotionally neutral spot rather than from the angry spot. We're not saying that you can't get angry, but then figuring out how you get from being angry to that emotionally neutral spot is the key.
Yeah, I mean, we can't completely control our thoughts. I mean, I sometimes joke with my students when I'm teaching them meditation. It's like, if you want to be happy, it's really easy. If you want to be happy, it's really simple, really simple. Okay, just think happy thoughts.
There you go.
But
Secret sauce.
The problem with that is that we don't have complete control over our thoughts.
Right.
And as you're saying, John, we don't have complete control over our thoughts. So because we have a thought, shouldn't necessarily be taken too seriously. We have thoughts, we have mental activity that's outside of our immediate control. What I would say, however, is that often when someone is being quote unquote offensive, it often has nothing to do with us.
Yep.
It has to do with I try to remember when someone is responding to me or talking to me or treating me in a way that is causing annoyance. And I will say this, I will give you a confession here. Like, my natural state is annoyance. Like, that is like the most natural state for me. It's like, left to my own devices, like I go to I'm annoyed, like the first noble truth of Buddhism is like, life involves suffering. You can't get around it. Well, for me, the first noble truth is life is annoying.
I have another friend like that, and it's just like everything is like, oh my god, I walked around all day being annoyed. I'm like, dude, everything annoys you.
Yeah. So I mean, so that's this is part of why I need to have mental cultivation activities right. And disciplines. But the point is that if I remember, if I can be aware that, listen, I don't know what is going on in this person's life right now. I have no idea. This is not about me. Why am I getting so annoyed because I want the person to be a particular way? When I think about, at one level, when I think about the interactions I've had which have been offensive or uncomfortable, they're kind of funny. Like, if you see someone being offensive that has nothing to do with you, sometimes it's kind of funny. And if I can just remove my own ego from the situation and just try to think about, maybe there's something going on in this person's life that's way more difficult than what's going on in my life, because my life is pretty easy. And some people just have more difficult lives.
Yeah, it comes back to the compassion that we're able to cultivate through a mindfulness practice. passion for
Yeah.
your fellow human being.
I like what you just stated there, Clark, because the first thing you said in the very top of the show is I was being selfish. If you're going to continually make the world or want the world to be exactly the way that it should be in your mind, you are always going to be annoyed. You're always going to be frustrated. You're always going to be angry. You're always going to be easily offended because you're not in the dynamic nature and the flow of life. I mean, it's just happening all the time. Another universal principle is everything is changing all the time. And that's what these practices help me to do continually, is help to adapt more effectively to that change that is always happening. And it's great. Instead of being selfish, taking it on, and as I grow and the three of us and everyone out there grow in emotional intelligence, it's like, wow, obviously something's going on with that person. It has nothing to do with me. I don't need to react. I don't need to rise to his level of his emotion right now. So another thing I think I also want to say is, and speaking of upgrades, right? We're talking about Masculinity 2.0, and we have been living through the primitive brain of humanity, right? As a human being for the last several thousands of years, because until maybe the last 70, 80, 100 years, life has not been this comfortable, right? But we're still wired, right, with this need to survive, and we're always moving through these survival instincts, and I feel a lot of that survival instincts that comes with these raw, more primitive emotions, where we're up leveling our emotional intelligence and kind of becoming more aware of our primal instincts, because if epigenetics has been proven to be real, and we're a product of our environment, and if our environment for the last several, tens of thousands and 100,000 years of human beings has been, I need to survive. I need to do anything I can. I need to beat the competition to survive. And now we don't have that anymore. But our brains don't change that fast. Our humanity does not change that fast. It's going to take 2 or 3 or 4 or generations or more until we get into this space that as rising as consciousness, as a mass of human beings collectively, that we can actually maybe not even offend people at all anymore in some ways, and maybe not even be so angry, and just realize that, oh, well, that's just life getting in or just life being life, which is changing all the time. I want to put that out there, because I think we're definitely dealing with some old software, very old software that definitely needs to be.
That's what we're here to do,
changed.
man. That's what we're here to do is help to upgrade that software. And this is the first in many episodes that will be part of that Masculinity 2.0 upgrade. Now, it's called Masculinity 2.0, but that doesn't mean it's just for men. Men and women both have masculinity, so it is for everyone, and we can all upgrade that masculinity and become better people. So, Will and Clark, this has been awesome, and I know, again, this is just the beginning of many episodes on this topic. So, anything over to you guys to wrap it up?
Yeah, we got a little time. Anything, Clark? Closing comments or
closing comment? A neuropsychologist once said, "Our brains evolved to keep us alive, not to make us happy."
Oh, wow! Yeah,
there you go.
And so then, how do we make ourselves happy? Practice, I guess.
Upgrade.
Right? Is it upgrade? Right? Upgrade with practicing. Right? We upgrade our software of masculinity. A great way to start meditating, starting to get to know your breath, right? Treat your body well, because how much are we learning on the show, John, about how incredibly it's not just the mind. It's like, if my body isn't healthy, I'm going to be a shithead.
Right.
Like, I'm just going to be walking around like that emotional bag of that, and stay in that primitive self, versus like, if I'm healthy, if I'm breathing, if I'm meditating, if I'm self-reflecting, also getting in conversations like this with other men or other people in my life to kind of see, asking other people to reflect back to me how I'm being, that's when things start to change. But without, that willingness to, go within and take those internal inventories of who I am, how I do things, then nothing's going to change, you know. And then you're always going to be angry, frustrated, easily offended, and not a productive member of society for yourself or anybody else.
There you go. On that note,
Awesome.
Thank you,
I'm
Clark.
excited to do this, guys. Thank you.
This is
Yeah,
fun.
thank you, Clark.
Great.
And until next
Totally.
time, peace.
Peace,
And literally,
peace, guys.
literally peace.
Yeah, peace, everybody. Peace, mind and body and world.
Thanks for joining Will and John on Men Talking Mindfulness. If you enjoyed the show, please like and share it with your friends and family, and please, we would appreciate a review too. Until next time, this has been Men Talking Mindfulness. Thanks for showing up.